Sorry to keep you from the pizza. I'll try to be a bit short, but I actually added 3 slides during the other talks, so I'm quite pessimistic about that. Anyway, so my name is Guy Hendrickx. Actually, I'm a veterinarian, and I started my career in '85 working in Africa. I was working mainly on tsetse flies, and in the '90s I was one of the first to use satellite information to model tsetse distributions and the diseases they transmit. So back in Belgium in 2001, I started a company called AVIA GIS. We are located not far from Janssen, actually, in Zoorsel, so we should talk. And we're still doing that. We're now with 15 people, and what we do is developing systems to collect spatial data, mainly about insects who transmit diseases, and the tiger mosquito, which is Aedes albopictus, the one which was mentioned already several times, is the culprit, is one of these vectors we work with. Just to make the link with the previous presentation, why use satellites to map and model vector-borne diseases? A vector is, it's not a mathematical thing in this talk. A vector is an insect transmitting something. So, well, because these insects are linked to the environment, satellites are not seeing mosquitoes, but satellites can monitor the habitat of mosquitoes, and that's what we do. And now these pathogens, which are transmitted by vectors, they are very smart because they are completely protected within the vector. They don't have free living stages, so they cannot be harmed by anything else. So they feel very safe within the vector. And so you do have the environment, the climate has an impact on the environment, has an impact on the vectors, on the host, and the pathogen is right in the middle of that. And then with the satellite, you can measure parts of the environment, and then you can start extrapolating. How do you do that? Here in the middle you see how these polar orbiting satellites work. They turn around Earth, the Earth turns under the satellite, and so within a period of time you got a full image. It's like patches which are glued together. So say your square there is the grid, is a country, and you want to map within that country if an insect is present, then you don't go and measure every little square. That would be a lot of work and would cost a lot of money. But what kind of information do you have of every little square? It's this kind of satellite information which was presented by Vito just before me. So if you, within that square, select, and you use statistical methods to do that, a number of squares randomly or stratified, and you're going to measure if the insect is present or absent, red, green, within these squares, and you have all that information of the other squares, you can use, this is just a simple regression, but you use more complicated formulas than that. You can kind of predict the probability of this insect to be in the other squares. So the trick is measure as little as possible so to get the best model. The trick is not take rubbish data, make a model, and you've got some nice map. No, rubbish in, rubbish out. But you need to measure correctly. So that's what we do. We actually use this kind of information to model. So now in 2008 we started collaboration with the European Centre for Disease Control, and that was the first time there was an effort to collect all the data about this tiger mosquito in Europe and to model based on data of existent presence. This is an invasive species, it's coming in. You know, this has nothing to do with climate change. I got nothing against climate change. And I mean, introduction of disease, there climate change will play a very important role, but this mosquito overwinters, as you said, so originally it's coming from a temperate zone, it's coming from Japan. And I don't know if you remember samurai movies, but winters are tough in Japan, it's not tropical. Only a little part of Japan is subtropical. The rest is quite temperate, like in Europe. So when this mosquito comes in, it can overwinter. It comes in through spare tires, not from cars, but you know, from airplanes or large machines which you use on roadworks, etc. And there's a huge traffic worldwide of spare tires. And mosquitoes, they like to breed in tires because it looks like a hole in a tree. And I mean, I think you know that, but whenever you have a pile of tires, there's always water in, because it's just the shape of the tire harbors water. So they actually are traveling the world. We made that first map I mean, actually, that was quite an extensive job, was to identify in Europe experts who knew about the mosquito, who could deliver the data. We made a database, and then we made that model. In red, that was what we predicted, given the current, well, that was in 2008, the actual presence, and then we predicted where it would spread on the Mediterranean. But then there was the next question of ECDC. This is an invasive mosquito, so where will it spread in future? This is independent, I mean, this cannot be predicted from the current places. So we looked at how it was in the States. That's where the mosquito has been spreading in a few years. Correct me if I'm wrong, 4 or 5 years, it spread from Florida up to Canada. It's quite invasive. And now that's what we predicted in Europe, the red and orangey bits. And then if taking into consideration climate change, and using different scenarios, the green bits, which is a bit fluffy there, but the green bits are where, given climate change, the situation will become good for that mosquito. So Europe is at risk to be covered completely by this mosquito. Now then, in 2010, for ECDC, we started a network which is called Burnett. That network is collecting data from, it's for about mosquitoes, ticks, sandflies, and biting midges. I won't go into detail, all over Europe, and we're producing every 3 months maps of all these different species. Well, within the mosquito group, there's a list within the tick group, etc., and also about the invasive mosquitoes. These maps are still, these are not maps, I mean, for the invasive species, these are map of changes. We're pretty sure we got close to every bit of information about these insects, and all these databases will be made available for this endeavor. For the other species, these are maps in progress, because it's quite complicated to get completed maps of these species. But we have a system, I mean, this is on the websites of ECDC in Stockholm, where all the data are checked with curators, etc. So these are validated data. So where are we now? On the left side, we have Aedes albopictus, our tiger mosquito. In red, these are the areas where the mosquito is present now. In yellow, these are the areas where the mosquito has been identified once. We don't know yet if it's going to overwinter, because some variants, albopictus is an incredible genetic machine. It's a very unique species. And I mean, between different albopictus, they don't have the same amount of genetic material. It's quite incredible how plastic the genome of that mosquito is. And some are tropical. And so, like for instance, in the Netherlands, you do have albopictus in the glass houses close to Schiphol, but they are tropical. They come from China with lucky bamboo, you know, these bunches of bamboo, which are decorative. But they have a gel, and in the gel you get the eggs of albopictus. So they are reintroduced, they live in those heated glass houses, and they can't survive outside. Anyway, and in green, we have experts who tell us that the mosquito is not there. This means that they do have surveillance programs, and they didn't find it. And in gray, we have experts telling us that they don't know. And in a database, making that distinction is quite important. On the left hand, we have Aedes aegypti. Aedes aegypti is the tropical form, and you see it's only present partly on the Black Sea, and if you see there on the left hand, also on Madeira, which was mentioned earlier. Madeira is an island which is, I don't know if you can consider it tropical. It's a lot hotter than the European continent, and where that mosquito is there, and where we had the only large-scale dengue epidemic in Europe. We've been talking about dengue and Zika, but there is a third virus called chikungunya, and we had chikungunya outbreaks due to albopictus in Ravenna, which is northeast of Italy, and also in Montpellier, which is southern France. So in summers, we will have more and more problems of introduction of the viruses. People come from holidays. Some are carrier, and we do have local populations of these mosquitoes, and they could transmit. And that also, I mean, having outbreaks in summer, you don't need climate change to get these outbreaks now already. Having them established over large areas and spreading in Europe, yes, I think there you will need climate change to get this kind of dynamics, but nobody knows. That's the problem with climate change. Nobody knows how it will happen and when it will happen. This is just the map a bit zoomed in. Now, this data set has been compiled by Kramer in Oxford, people we collaborate with, into a global data set. And that global data set is published, so we can also share that with the group. This global data set, the European data are brilliant because we provided them. Well, that's the VectorNet network, is really good quality network. The other data are mainly published data, so it's not always perfect, but it is possible to use them for modeling using the same methods as we do. Our pictures on top and Egypti on the bottom. Don't forget, our pictures comes from Southeast Asia and now has been invading the world. I mean, it's quite a successful invader. Now, Roger is the guy from whom I learned it. When I did my PhD, he's from Oxford. He actually was the first to use this kind of satellite and to do this kind of modeling. And I learned it from him. And that's his last paper, because now he's retired for the philosophical transactions, where he was modeling here dengue. So this is a map modeling the actual current risk areas of dengue. It's a very interesting paper. And here also it shows how it's going to evolve. It's got the different mosquitoes and the dengue on the bottom. It's not very clear on the screen, but I can give you the references for that paper. And then this is current work we're currently doing for WHO, where we are modeling now the distribution of Aedes albopictus and Aegypti for what they call the Eastern Mediterranean region. And we were very surprised to hear that Eastern Mediterranean region in WHO talk means from Morocco to Pakistan. Anyway, to me it looks like maybe the center is the Eastern Mediterranean. Anyway, we're modeling this. This is not published yet, but very interestingly, so this provides more. Remember the models from Kramer I showed. This represents a gap in the data. There's lots of data about. There's lots of data about the Americas, Brazil, the other countries. There's lots of data about Southeast Asia. Yes. There's a lot less data about sub-Saharan Africa, and there's almost nothing about that region. So we have been focusing on extracting and refining modeling to refine this. And this is Aegypti. You see, the albopictus is not a tropical mosquito, but Aegypti is a tropical mosquito. And we are now using that to prepare for each of these countries a surveillance program, because there's not yet Zika there. There hasn't been cases detected of Zika, as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong. But we are now going to propose to each of these countries a surveillance program where they can monitor if there is an introduction of that mosquito, eventually, but especially of the disease. And the final, this is ongoing work. We now just contracted by ECDC to construct a tool, Aedes risk. Actually, now we're going to make the link between the mosquito and the disease. And Kostas, who is here, has already is working on an MSc developing SIR models where we link. These are complemental models. He can tell you everything about it with a piece of pizza. It's almost there. And so we are also happy to actually organize a workshop. We can organize a workshop to explain the data and to actually show a bit of our modeling techniques. We can provide, we develop software to do that too. So we have, we could provide, we can see what we can provide so that what the needs are, and then we can see what comes out of it. Thank you a lot.